Oh, thank you.
Welcome to the historic Egyptian Theater here in Park City. This is kicking off the 35th Sundance Film Festival for 2018. I'd like to welcome our special panelists, the Sundance Institute founder and president, Robert Redford, executive director, Keri Putnam, and Sundance Film Festival director, John Cooper.
Thank you.
My name is Barbara Chai, and I'm the head of arts and culture coverage at Dow Jones Media Group. So I'm going to kick things off for about 30 minutes in conversation with our panelists, and then I'm going to turn it over to the journalists here in the audience for a Q&A. So this is the 35th year of the Sundance Film Festival. Can you talk about the growth and progression of the festival from the roots when it started here in Utah?
Yeah, I can. Sometimes it's hard to believe that many years has gone by when you started something, but I'll try to go back to the beginning as how this thing came about and why we're here, who we are and why we're here. It started at Sundance, which is about 40 miles from here, the area at Sundance. And so the idea was to create a lab process where there were a lot of new voices out there, but they were on the margin. The industry was pretty well controlled at that time by the studio system, and the studio system had a very strong edict of wanting to move towards profit. So their support of films usually had the idea, well, this has to be in some way profitable. And I understand that. I was very much a part of that system. But I also could see and feel that there were other voices out there, and there were other stories to be told that were maybe more risky. They were more under this heading of independence, but they weren't being given a chance. So I thought, well, without harming the industry, maybe we can just add to it. So how to do that? How to create a mechanism where we could help these new voices get developed so they could at least get their stories told. And so that was the idea of the lab process. And I called on my own colleagues in the business, writers, directors, actors, editors, cinematographers, would you be willing to come up to Sundance and help these new artists develop? And their generosity was received, and so they came. So we had a process. And that's how it started, and that was 1980. Then what happened was I could see that these projects were getting developed. The voices were getting to a point where they could be heard, but there was nowhere to go. So that led to the idea of, well, what can we do about that? And so I thought, well, if we had a theater, if we had a place where they could at least show each other their work, we could maybe create a community of artists sharing each other's work. And maybe, with luck, that could expand into a broader audience. So I didn't have the space over at Sundance. I didn't want that much impact anyway, but we needed a space, and the nearest space was Park City. In those days, in 1985, Park City was really a ski town, and there was a bit of a dead zone in terms of the arts. And they just had one theater, the Egyptian, and then they had maybe 4 restaurants in town. So I thought, well, maybe we can use that theater as a exhibition point. So that's how it really started in 1985. And in the first years, it was a struggle. There were maybe 25 films and maybe 10 or 12 documentaries. And we just sort of built it from there. And it took a while for it to catch on, but once it caught on, then it caught fire. And more artists realized that they had a place now where they could go. So more artists came into the development process, blah, 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 blah. So that's what happened. Meantime, I had John Cooper, who was looking at our programming. He was head of our programming development, and he could see that there were great opportunities that were starting to expand, and that he was going to have a larger role to play, and we can let John talk about that. And I had a lot of faith in John because I thought he was really smart, and I thought he had a really strong opinion, and he had a really strong idea about how we could gain and have more freedom. And so I was happy to see John step up to that role. So that takes care of John. And then unfortunately he failed, and we had to let him go, but we brought him back again. And so Anyway, so I think that's enough for the moment about why we're here.
This is a distinctive year in the film industry and in Hollywood with the rise of the Me Too movement, Time's Up movement, in the wake of sexual misconduct allegations against many in Hollywood and in other industries. What are you doing to address these movements and the allegations?
Well, I think I can turn that over to Keri. I think that from my standpoint, I think change is inevitable, and change is going to come, and sometimes it can be positive, sometimes it can't. I'm pretty encouraged right now as this period of change is, what it's doing is it's bringing forth more opportunity for women, and more opportunity for women in film to have their own voices heard and do their own projects. I'm pretty excited by that. I think it's really a good time. So change is producing it's kind of a tipping point because it's changing the order of things so that women are going to have a stronger voice, and they didn't have it before. It was too much control by the male dominance. But now I think it's going to be more even-handed. And I think the role for women to be able to step forward and exercise their voices more and more, I think is a really wonderful thing. And I think the role for men right now would be to listen and to let their voices, the women's voices, be heard and think about it. And then maybe discuss it among themselves and so forth. It's a time of change that I think can lead to a new conversation. At least I'm hopeful.
Keri?
Yeah, I love that, Bob. Thank you for saying that. I thought that was wonderful. I just want to say that for me personally, the movement and the conversation that Me Too and Time's Up has generated has been incredibly moving, and I think important for all women. And I do think it's about more than a few individual men. I think it's about the underlying systems of power, and especially in the media industry. What this has meant for us, I think, is looking at what are those structures, what are those assumptions that we make in terms of what we value, who gets financing, who gets distribution, who gets to tell the stories, and what stories we tell. So, at Sundance, we're very lucky. I'm very lucky because we do work with a lot of underrepresented storytellers. We work with a lot of women storytellers. I get the opportunity to have conversations with people at studios, people at agencies, with artists, with producers who, about these issues and about how to advance that conversation. And what I've noticed in the wake of this movement, sort of much to Bob's point, is something really exciting, a really different energy happening. I think we see that there's a receptivity, there's a new listening. This isn't a new conversation for us, but it's a new moment. And we're not gonna go backwards from here. So I'm very excited about that. I do wanna recognize though, I don't think making change in a complex system like ours is easy. And I think that it's going to require a lot of effort and a lot of pressure and a lot of conversations. So want to recognize that too. And just one more thing. I think when we talk about the media field and we think about these issues at Sundance, we're not just talking about equity in hiring, although of course we are talking about that. We're also talking about the media. Representation in media has a multiplier effect on the culture. When you're talking about representing the totality of people in media, you're talking about, as a society, what do we value? Who do we imagine, what can you imagine yourself to be? What do you see on your screens? Do you see yourself represented? I think that's really important. And I actually think what we see in our media can itself help address issues of bias, of harassment, and of violence. So this is why I really think this is worth fighting for. And I think this has been a long part of the history of Sundance, and I think it's something our audiences here care about too. So I know, practically.
And I think, just because we're at the Sundance Film Festival right now at this time, it's a bit of a ground zero for the beginning of conversations that I think are only going to be starting here. We have some very interesting panels happening. But then we had to take it one step even for ourselves, for safety, to make ourselves feel better and to make everybody here. Because when you form a community, you have to form an experience that feels safe. And so we created a code of conduct. We have had a code of conduct for our staff and volunteers for years and years, but it had to go bigger this year, and we wanted to make everybody here. If we say we're forming a community, we have to bring everybody in on this. So there's the code of conduct, which you'll see everywhere. It's on the badges, and a very new, interesting the hotline, because you pulled this off.
Yeah. Well, actually, our managing director, Betsy Wallace, I want to recognize, see her right there. Betsy Wallace pulled this off, and it's a really unprecedented partnership that we created with the Attorney General in the state of Utah, and also working with the city of Park City and law enforcement. But it was the Utah Attorney General. There's a 24-hour hotline that attendees at the festival can call that is part of the code of conduct. So if there's any incident or any attendee who wants to report something, that will be available for them. And I think it's a step we wanted to take to ensure the safety and comfort of all of our guests, consonant with our values. So that's a very practical effort we're taking.
A big part of the conversation is also about equal pay and equal opportunities for women, for underrepresented groups. The Sundance Institute traditionally supports the work, focuses very much on the work, but what are some of the initiatives to focus on the career as well? Things like pay, negotiating, working with agents to level the playing field.
I'll take this one. I've been talking a lot, so I'll take it sort of quickly. There's so much we can talk about, and read our website. I encourage you to check this stuff out. But we have.
But it's also not just here; it's the Institute. So
yeah, I'm going to talk about the Institute. We have. We've spent a lot of time investing in advancing storytellers, women, yes, but also storytellers from all backgrounds, to be able to tell their stories at all stages. But really, the way we wanted to start this is by doing research, by investing in research as to where the barriers were. And so in the case of women, with Women in Film and USC, we invested in some research and learned more specifically where they were falling out of the pipeline, where they were failing to advance. And what we learned was we needed to spend more time and energy on early stage programs. We needed to do more outreach. We needed to find ways of going into communities and finding artists at an early stage. We've done that, not just for women, but for a lot of different populations. But also, and importantly, there was success often making a first film, but problem sustaining a career, problem getting a second film made, problem learning how to access financing. So we created a lot of programs, fellowships, access to investors who wanted to find ways of investing in independent film. So programs at Sundance that enable people to sustain their careers, to hopefully be able to get the second, third, fourth film made and be able to have a flourishing career as a filmmaker and access opportunities. So the idea of Sundance is a place not just to come to learn to develop your first project, but really to be part of a community that's going to be there for you as you develop your creative life. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do.
And I think it's really important, too, even to start as youth as something separate, because that's where the change is going to come. So the Ignite program, which I won't go into a lot, is a program for 18 to 25-year-olds. And it's amazing, and the youth that's coming through there is teaching us how to change, because they're already there. And me, like the old people, are the ones that are like, oh, that's how it can be done. It can be just that fast, too, by just changing.
And then one last thing is our project Reframe, which is taking everything we've learned and partnering, again, with Women in Film, but also with 50 leaders in the industry to go back and really look at how to mitigate bias in the decision-making process along the creative at studios and networks as they're making decisions of who they're going to hire and how they're going to develop projects, market projects, finance projects. We launched that project 2 years ago, and we've been rolling it out to studios and networks together with the ambassadors in the industry. And it's now part of the Time's Up Coalition. I've been really proud to be part of the Time's Up movement through Reframe and wearing my Sundance hat. And it's like it's been supercharged in this moment. Even though it's 2 years old, it's now sort of part of this momentum, and that's been wonderful too. So that's what we're up to.
John, what's new this year at the festival? There's a whole new section on indie episodic you have a new Festival Favorite Award as well.
Yes, and let's start with a new theater. We have a new theater. For those who know the town well, it's called The Ray. It's down between Fresh Market, and that's a Fresh Market plug. Fresh Market and the old Yarrow. It's in that area, and it's an urban reclamation. It's an old sports authority that we took over. It is amazing. The sound is incredible. It looks great. We are so proud of it. We did this in 3 months. It took all of our staff. We were crazy. We shouldn't have ever tried it, but we did it. But that's kind of what we do at Sundance too.
Let me add something
yeah.
to that, John, because we are crazy. We're still crazy.
Well, because you're the founder.
Yeah, the idea that when we started, there was just one street.
Yeah.
It was Main Street here in Park City. And so over time, as things grew, the infrastructure grew as well. And pretty soon, there was less space. And then suddenly, we were kind of under threat, and there was a lot of suggestions, well, maybe you should take it out of Park City. Maybe you should take the Sundance Film Festival and put it somewhere else. And I thought, no, this is where we started, this is where we want to stay. So if Park City's going to change, then we should probably float with it. Pretty much like you do, I guess the metaphor would be a wave, a surf wave, and you are either inside the curl of the wave, going with it, to be flushed out on the shore, or you're slightly behind and the wave leaves you. So that was sort of the metaphor that I was thinking. I thought, no, we'll go with it, but we would like to stay. We don't want to give up the name Park City, because that's how everything started. We want to honor our birthplace. And so that's what John is saying, is this is our effort. Rather than leaving, we really are staying in the area so we can still claim Park City as our festival.
Yep. And even following, when you think of the new indie episodic program, we've been testing the water for a while. We started with Top of the Lake. We did OJ Made in America. Episodic work is happening, and that's where a lot of the true independence is happening. And we just didn't. We've always been a festival that follows the artists and what they're doing. So it's real now. And this was actually a brainchild, mostly of Trevor Groth, the director of programming. But we started to see that there was lots of independent episodic stuff being made. And where's that going to go? Where's that going to be celebrated? Where's that going to be lifted up and possibly sold to other people? So we have 2 whole days, Tuesday and Wednesday, of independent episodic work. I think it's really exciting. It's exciting work. It's edgy. It's hot, but it's, I think, going to help inform the whole industry as well. And the truth is, when you start looking at it, a lot of the same filmmakers back and forth. So it's our community as well. And they're going all the way over to VR. So it's a whole, I think at the Ray, yeah, downstairs at the Ray, I didn't even say this, is a whole lower level of VR work, which is quite incredible.
Bob, this is a question for you, because talking to you is a bit like talking to Bob Woodward. So it's a journalism question.
Oh.
There's been so much public discourse on this notion of fake news. Just last night were the so-called fake news awards, and the press and the media have been challenged consistently by this administration. The very notion of truth has been turned on its head. You know, what are your thoughts on that as a leader in film and media, but also someone who's very steeped in journalism? And what role does art and do documentaries potentially play within that?
Well, I think, first of all, I think I'm a huge fan of journalism, which I think is borne out over time by some of the projects I've done. So journalism is a big deal for me, and it always seems to be under threat periodically. You know, something comes up, and then it dies down, and then it comes up, and it dies down. But because journalism is our means of getting to the truth, and I think getting to the truth is getting harder and harder in this climate, when you have so many stories being told by so many different sources, and you have the floating word of fake journalism, and that becomes threatening to the proper use of journalism. So you want journalism to represent the truth and getting the truth to the people. So for me, that's a pretty big deal. And I'll tell you one moment that happened that changed the course of what I was thinking. Years ago, I could see that journalism was under threat during the Nixon administration, and that led me to contact Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, and first of all, Bob. And when I met him, I said, look, I'm interested in doing a film, and it's not about what happens to Nixon. History will take care of that. I'm interested in what you guys did. I'm interested in what you had to do that very few people were doing, if anybody, to get to the truth. And to me, that's the story. And so that means the relationship of you two guys is the story. It's like a character-driven piece. And he was very adamant at that time of suggesting that he was not worth it. We saw there was an interesting, he said, I'm boring. He said, I'm just not very interesting. And I said, well, can I decide that, you know? And he says, no, Carl's the interesting guy. And I said, well, I have a hunch that you're more interesting than you want people to know. And so that led to a real exploration of Bob Woodward as a character. And we won't go into the results of that, but it was very exciting for me to explore a character that really was trying to present themselves in a more neutral place. And I realized there was a lot more to them. And so that took me deeper into the characterability of this piece. And that's when I realized, well, maybe that's the way to approach journalism. You know, look at who's telling the story. Who's telling the story and how they're telling the story, and let the public try to decide. Right now, we're under, the democratic part of journalism is under such threat because of all the voices out there, and many of them are hostile. Many of the voices are trying to create a diverse universe. And it makes it harder for the public to understand what's going on. So I see that as our role at the festival to promote journalism that really works hard to get to the truth against the odds.
This last question is for the whole panel. When I was traveling to the airport in New York, I got into a lengthy conversation with a man from Haiti. So this is after the comments made by President Trump about his country. And he spoke actually very in an inspiring way, because he says that he keeps the faith, and that's how he gets through it, even though he feels he doesn't have a voice. And it got me thinking about artists, and to me, maybe the artist's act of faith is the act of creating, of taking everything that has made them and seeing what they can make out of it, and that is their offering. But when the odds are stacked against them in this world or in this industry, where they feel they do not have a voice, they are not represented accurately, they are marginalized, how does Sundance inspire these artists and filmmakers to keep the faith?
By supporting them aggressively and letting them know that their voices really, really do count. And I think since it's always so hard, since it's so hard to get to the truth, with so many voices out there claiming the truth, you have to try to find the right people to support. And I think that the idea that you want to say, okay, we need to support you, we need to help you by creating a platform as best we can for your voices to be heard. Otherwise, you're going to stay in the margins. And I feel that that's always been a threat. I think if you look at the history of how journalism was treated going back to Nixon and probably even before that with McCarthy and so forth, it's always been under threat, but it always finds its way out. And I'll tell you something, sorry. I'll tell you something else that came up that seemed like a diversion at the time, but I want to share it with the audience. That while I was working, I was asked to do a documentary about revisiting Watergate, and my initial impulse was, no, that's done. Don't exhaust that. Let that be a part of history, whatever you want, but don't go back there. And they kept pressing me. A company kept pressing me, would you please reconsider? So I said, well, let me look at some archival footage. So I was looking at archival footage going back to the Watergate hearings and so forth, and I saw something extraordinary that I had missed. And that was, there was a panel, and the panel was made up of Democrats and Republicans. Sam Erwin was the head of it. You had Sam Dash, and you had Baker and those guys. And they were all from different ideologies. But they were all working together to get to the truth. And they were interviewing John Dean. And the way they were performing, giving to each other and joining with each other and coalescing to try to get to the truth. And I thought, well, that's a time gone by. I mean, what happened to that time? There was a time. There really was a time when two sides worked together to get traction. And it seems that we've lost that with the ideological warfare that seems to be going on between two sides. Rather than working together, rather than finding a common language to work together to get to the main thing, which is what is the truth, they're at odds with each other, so it becomes like a war zone. And I'm thinking that's really sad. If you could have seen it how it was and realized, hey, it's it's not like there never was a time. There was a time. And there was a time when two sides came together in the true democratic process. And we, for the moment at least, have lost that. And that's why I think it's very important now to point that out and to say, look, we don't want to completely lose something that was so valuable. We want to bring that back. And the best way to do it is to illustrate how it was then, and now you can see how it is now.
And Keri?
Yeah, I'd love to take it back to the artists, just because I'm so inspired by that idea of how they do go forward. And I think, I was just at the lab, the Sundance lab, and I think there are things that we can do to inspire artists to go forward. I agree with what Bob said about supporting them. Of course, it is what we do. But I think it's bringing. I think artists coming together in communities support one another. And what I find the best thing that we can do is very intentionally create communities for artists to be together and find ways of supporting one another, because they so passionately have stories they want to tell, and if they're together and they can reinforce one another's desire to tell stories, they're fueled again, and they're out there and they know they have something they want to say. So I think
Sometimes art, I agree with you, Keri, sometimes art gets pushed aside like it's either irrelevant or but to put that forward and say, here's why it is relevant, and that is that art, to me, if somebody to ask me, I'm an artist, so obviously I'm prejudiced on this point, but if somebody were to ask me, I would say that the role of art in society is to describe it and critique it. And people need to know I think people need to know the value of art in our society and what it's bringing to people. And so for me, it boils down to those 2 points. You describe it so that people understand what's going on, and then you critique it and say, okay, what, in terms of democratic principles, what's not working the way it should, and what is working the way it should?
Thank you. And John?
No, that's 2 hard acts to follow to get something new in all this. But I do think it's the what I almost call the grassroots support. It's the Q&As in that we lead. It's the standing backstage with a director when they're nervous as hell and pushing them on that stage, telling them they're pretty, telling them whatever you got to tell them to get them out there. But also it really is, I agree with Keri, it's the strength in this is knowing that you're not alone. Even if you were doing Blackfish and you're doing rape in the military, that you have a common bond around storytelling as a power to change the world. And I think that's what we do here.
Thank you all so much. And we are now, thank you very much. So I'm going to now turn it over to the audience. We have people walking around with mics. Please state your name and outlet before you ask the question, and please try to keep them as succinct as possible. Over here, the gentleman.
Hi, Sean Means, the Salt Lake Tribune. Harvey Weinstein had been a force in Park City and at the festival for many years, until the revelations last October. Many people have talked about the people who enabled Harvey over the years to get away with the things he got away with. I wanted to write this down because I wanted to say this right. What have you all at Sundance Institute, have you talked about where you might have enabled people like Harvey, and what you at Sundance and what the industry can do to change that?
I'll take this one. Thanks, Sean. I mean, we were sickened to hear, along with everyone else, about Harvey's behavior, and certainly even more so to learn that at least a couple of those incidents happened during the Sundance Film Festival. And, Cooper already spoke about our code of conduct. Cooper and I spoke about that, and I know you're aware of that. We've spoken about that. So in terms of what we can do to mitigate that sort of behavior, that was one, tangible thing that we tried to do. I think as an industry, as a culture, the movements we spent a little time talking about at the beginning of the panel are things that we're doing. And I do believe that the awareness that has been raised by the movements that have come out in the wake of not only Harvey's behavior, but a lot of the other behavior that's been discussed, are creating a new sort of awareness and a new sort of conversation that we're not going to go backwards from. So I do think that that's positive. I think further, Sundance as an institution never contributed to that behavior. We have longstanding values of respect and tolerance, and we support artists, so we stand for diversity and creativity and a lot of things that are in direct opposition to that kind of behavior. So I really do want to be firm on that, and while of course these things sickened us and happened during our festival, they're nothing we were aware of at the time.
Hello, Fernando Grossi Andrade from Folha de São Paulo, Brazil, and Quebrando Tabu and my YouTube channel. I would like to know from the panel if you believe filmmaking can change the world. For instance, Blackfish almost shut down SeaWorld. And if so, if you can point films on the program this year that you think can produce change. Thank you very much.
Great question.
Yeah, wow. And you are right. I mean, it's I think what drives us a lot. And just by the way, Brazil did very well this year at this festival, 2 amazing feature films in the competition. I think that, wait, what was the first part of your question? I just spaced out.
And which films in the festival are going to
Can filmmaking change the world? I only believe that you can really change the world through story. I don't even think arguing or theory, that helps clarify what the problem is, but I think getting real people to have real feelings about these subjects, it's all through story. That's what I believe. That's why I do this job. As far as changing the world, there's some very clever, dark money is one, of course. I think that it's all about, election funding, et cetera, et cetera. There's the one about, I knew you were going to do this to me. I can't remember the one, about Teflon. The Devil We Know. And what happens, why I don't remember,
Thanks, Sam.
they keep changing the title as I go. I know it as another title from 2 months ago, is definitely one that's going to raise. But filmmakers are different. There's a short that you should look at, and it's by Marshall Curry. It's called A Night at the Garden, and it is a Nazi rally that was held in 1939 in New York City with a man standing on stage talking about how to make a better America, how America has to change, and how it's all the fault of the journalists that are doing this. It is the most shocking thing I've seen of all the movies so far. And in that, somebody tries to take the stage, they beat him down, they take him off. There's a smirk on the guy's face who's talking. I mean, it's horrifying. And this is about 9 months before Hitler invaded Poland. And this is in our country with 22,000 people there cheering him on. And that's the horrifying image. And that image, you can take that to the bank, because that's, it says it all right there. And it's more powerful to me than even a 3-hour movie about everything that's been going wrong. And that's the power.
This woman right here.
Jan Price from iHeartRadio. This question is for Mr. Redford. How do you see Sundance, or actually independent films, going forward post Harvey Weinstein, since he was such an instrumental part of financing films and getting them distributed? How do you see that changing now?
Well, I think Harvey Weinstein was like a moment in time, and I think that we're going to move past that. And others like him that are being accused of the same thing, I think we will move past that. I don't think he's going to stop the show. I think the main thing is to ensure that when we have people that come to the festival, like Harvey, they came to the festival with one thing in mind. They appeared to be very supportive of the festival, and I think they were, but it was for their own interests, because they were looking at our festival to find out what they could cherry pick for their own use. So he could take some of the films and probably get them cheaper here, and then go out and promote them as his own. Okay, well, that we have no, there's nothing we can do about that. We're not a control mechanism. We can't control what goes out of this festival. The idea of the festival to begin was to, as I said earlier, was to create a place for local filmmakers to come and show their work. And what happened with globalization, that suddenly there was an additional opportunity where we could bring films from other countries. So we grew culturally, we grew to a wider margin, and we could bring films from other countries to our festival. And to me, that was a great moment, because then we could really increase the value of independent film by saying, look, these are films from all over the world, and we're going to show them here. So this place is going to be known as the place where you can see not only films domestically, what are coming out of our own people, but films from other places, and let you see where the connective tissue is. You see how things are connected here? What's occupying their interests, and we're going to show you that. And that's just something I think we're very proud of, and we're going to continue with. Harvey had no relevance to that. Harvey was just there, as many others were. He wasn't alone. There were other people like Harvey who came to the festival to see what they could take for their own purpose. But we weren't involved with that. We didn't occupy ourselves with who's here for what purpose. It's an open festival. They can do what they want. Our purpose was to make sure that the festival was just showing the work of the artists.
There's a woman in the back wearing an orange vest. Oh, sorry, we'll do here first.
Victoria Kupchinetsky, Voice of America. Thank you so much for taking my question. Could you just talk in a little bit more detail about the program of the festival this year, about the films that you've chosen, and also about how those films are addressing the issues that we've been talking about here, and specifically the issue of fake news, our democracy being under threat, and the freedom of speech being under threat. And I know that there is at least one film in the festival that deals with that issue. It's how the Russian media formed the image of Trump during the election cycle. So if you could just talk a little bit about those issues. Thank you.
How do you deal with fake news is you don't support it and you just keep telling the truth. And not just the truth like maybe another outlet is, but our filmmakers tell the truth in deeper ways. A documentary form allows for a much deeper dive. It's something that almost no one was interested in until you go there. And the truth is exciting, and you see a bigger issue come to light in a real way. I think that's how you do it. You choose those films. The film that you're referencing is called Our New President, and it is pretty much solely footage from Russian media on the election. It is so clever. Again, it's like the one with the Nazi rally. It is just cutting together the coverage of Hillary, the coverage of what they believe, and YouTube people from Russia. It's a fascinating, and you know what? It's kind of fun to watch too. It's frightening, but it's kind of an exciting watch because I had no idea this existed. So that's what documentaries do for us. They also tell us worlds that we don't even know. I think you might have had another part of your question. Did I hit it?
More about the program as a whole, and how it deals with the issues of our time.
You know, it's funny, like when we're talking about all this Harvey Weinstein stuff, which, you know, we're almost past Harvey at this point. We're on to change. And I'm kind of sick of him. And he wasn't even that big of a deal with us for the last couple of years, so just clarity. But I think, where was I going with that? I got on a little Harvey rant. But, the program. Yes, but it's mainly nothing. It almost has a 2-year span. What we saw in this year's festival, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty, is much more, a new wave was much more about the African-American experience in America. And we saw many more films like that come through, because if you think it almost is a 2-hour span for 2 years, 2-year span about how long it takes a movie to come into fruition, that was right, it was 2 years ago, almost to today or tomorrow, with Oscars So White hit, and that kind of change, that spurred people to start either financing movies that are about a different subject or even make those movies. So that's kind of what we're going to see. So any of the stuff, most of the stuff happened actually after and during we were programming. But you do watch the movies different. There's a relevance that happens in movies that you watched one way before, and now they have a different feeling watching them now. And I think that's what you're going to see. You even see it in old TV shows. Because I watch a lot of TV too. But especially women in power, and how it was accepted, you see that, coming across. And so,
but I also want to point out, just in terms of the demographics of the festival this year has 38% female directors, which we're very, excited about. I think in terms of the composition of just demographics, I think it's 32% directors of color. So we have a really diverse festival, not where we need to be. We understand there's more progress to go, but we're really proud of as a festival representing a really wide array of story and storytellers, and I think that is very reflective of the conversation that's going on right now as a program.
I'd like to add something to what Cooper was saying about documentaries. I'd like to emphasize that more, the value of documentaries. What we had at one point in time, we had 3 channels way back. You had ABC, NBC, and CBS, and that was about it. And that's where you got the news. And over time, that's developed, and now we have Fox News, we have this news, we have all these avenues to get the word out. But at the same time, while they're doing it, they're tightening up their time frame. So it becomes a soundbite world. In other words, we get this information, we get this news from a soundbite position from many different channels. So for me, I thought this seems like a really good time to emphasize the value of documentaries. Because as things shrink, as things become more sound-bitten, more value to the story that can be told over an hour. And they have an hour to tell a story, to make a point. And to me, considering that what we're up against otherwise, that's very valuable. So as a result, we're putting a lot of energy into promoting the value of documentaries.
There's a question in the back.
Can I just say one more thing since we're on that? And it's not just documentaries. You really have to look at the VR work this year, when you could be put in a situation, maybe something some of you have seen as the Inarritu piece that's now at LACMA, that was at Cannes. I mean, it puts you in situations where you're feeling it in a different way. So even from the feature film to the short films, now to VR, it's a whole nother mode of getting true feelings into the issues.
Hi, this is Mandalit Del Barco from NPR. John, you talked about episodic television and VR being kind of more the indie film spirit, and I'm wondering if each of you can talk about what you think independent film is today versus maybe what it used to be.
I think it's kind of the same. Independent film comes from a place that's personal, a place of passion, and maybe the passions change. They get a little bigger in some filmmakers or another, but I call it independent spirit, but it's really not letting anything stop you either, knowing that you have a story to tell and pushing through. Filmmaking, we all know, isn't easy. I don't know how they do it. I am not a filmmaker. I don't think I ever could be one. I do what I do. But I think it's just that the spirit of having a story to tell and making sure that you do it.
I'll say I totally agree with that, and I just say I think it defies categories. I think artists are freer to say let the form fit the story. Let's not get caught up in definitions of film or episodic or VR or short or feature or even discipline. Look at Bart Layton's film, American Animals. It's got documentary and narrative. You see interdisciplinary stuff. You see, I think you see people really very porously slipping between forms and shapes and sizes, and I think that's awesome. But I think the spirit of independence and the idea of a personal, authentic narrative goes through all of it.
Right here.
Hi, Tomris Lafley, Film Journal International. So I have a question for all the panelists. We come to Sundance and we experience the films in theaters along with audiences, but later on, and I know, as Mr. Redford said, you don't have a control over what happens to the film, but later on, some of the bigger films we see that find distribution sidestep theatrical, or they get minimal theatrical and fall to streaming immediately. So I'm wondering, as these distribution formats evolve and as the way audiences engage with movies evolve, what are your thoughts about the future of filmmaking and maybe the future of the Institute?
I'll start that one if you don't. Shall I start that one, Bob?
I have no choice.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna start that one. I'm gonna repeat the question also, so that Bob can also have a quick. I think she's asking the future with all distribution changing. So a lot of people are watching film now on Netflix or in digital instead of in cinemas. What do we think about the future of independent film? And I think I think we do care that the films from Sundance get seen, because I think our artists care. While we don't control it, I agree with Bob that that's not our, we're not in the distribution business. We do care that Sundance is a platform for work to go on and be seen by millions all over the world. This is a place that people do discover work. But I don't think we should be purist about how audiences want to experience the work. I think some artists love their work to be seen in a theater. Some people would rather their work be seen more widely digitally, and I think those are both good. It's not an either or, so that's how I feel about it. That said, there's another point about audiences that I think is really important for all of the community at Sundance to think about. I am blown away when I see what happens at the festival with the audiences, in the theaters, in the lines, in the restaurants, the conversations, the community at film festivals. And it's not just at Sundance, but there is something that happens in live audiences, especially engaged audiences, around an authentic cinema experience with real content that isn't just disposable, mass-produced content. And I think that it's possible for us as a community to be ambassadors, to be amplifiers, to be champions for that sort of content to be available in cinemas more around the world. And I think audiences as a whole can be part of the demand for more diversity in what we see in the cinemas. And it can't just be up to the artist and the industry to diversify what's happening in content. It has to be up to the audience too. So that's a plea that I would make for audiences here at Sundance.
I'd like to couple two things together if I can, because one of them involves our lab process, which takes place 40 miles away from here. This is our place of exhibition, with the generosity of Park City and the theater and so forth. But the core of who we are and what we do is really at Sundance with our lab process. So there's a lot to learn from that. And when we came here to exhibit, I underestimated something. For me, it was going to be a one-way street to support the filmmakers having a place to show their work. And what I underestimated was that it was actually a two-street process, because I underestimated the value for the audience. That audiences that came here were coming here because they were going to see something they were not able to see in the marketplace, because the marketplace was more narrow. And so I underestimated that, and that's why I was pleasantly surprised. I didn't know that we would even survive in the first year or two. But once I saw the audiences increasing, I thought, well, Jesus, what's going on, And so I realized, oh, they're coming here because they're able to see something they are not able to see in the marketplace. And that's when I realized we had another dimension that we could pursue. The other thing I wanted to tie to that, to share with you all, is a very exciting moment for me. Yesterday we had our lab process at Sundance, which closed up, and we had our advisors. Our advisors are people who are made up of the mainstream film business that are editors, directors, cinematographers. They're experienced people working with inexperienced people, the novices, the new voices that are going to be developing film. So we all come together and we share stories and so forth. And there was a moment, because I underestimated what our value was, where somebody said, and then it was conjoined by others. I just want to say that I come here because I know this is a safe place. And they talked about safety, and then others spoke up about why they so appreciated coming to Sundance, because they knew they were safe here. They were safe to make mistakes. They were safe to push themselves, to try new things, and not be accounted for necessarily, but to have the freedom to take chances. And for them, that meant safety. And to me, that was a real compliment to our process.
Who's next? This gentleman over here in the back.
Hi, Eric Cohn from IndieWire. I have a question from Mr. Redford because it's a filmmaker question. The last few years, there's been this trend in filmmakers who maybe break out at the festival taking on studio gigs, sometimes really quickly. And I'm sort of curious about your thoughts on that process of being discovered here and going from being an independent filmmaker to being a part of that bigger Hollywood system so quickly.
Well, it's basically their choice, as long as they have a choice. In other words, the idea of starting Sundance, we didn't want to disparage the major film business because it's a valuable business, and it's a great camping ground for filmmakers to go to. But I just felt there needed to be another opportunity in addition to that, and that was the more marginalized films that may not be brought in by the major studios, and that we should develop an opportunity for those films to have a place to be seen. So basically, it was just extending the business, not taking something away or criticizing something that was already there, like the mainstream. It was simply saying, okay, that's fine, but there's more to be heard here, there's more to be seen, there's more to know, and that has to do with the new artists that are more marginalized, that they have more risky projects, they're way more independent in their thinking and probably wouldn't have an opportunity otherwise. So let's create a platform for those films and those filmmakers to develop and also be seen. And so that's the bottom line of what we've tried to do, is expanding something and not criticizing something that is already there, just expanding what's there.
And all the stigmas are gone as well. You can come and do a big Hollywood movie and then come back like David Lowery did last year with a smaller movie, and that's what I'm loving on this. And especially not just from the director's side, but from the actor's side. If you see some amazing roles, especially by women, that go and do big Hollywood movies, but then they're back here in leading roles that are meaty and great. When you look at Laura Dern and Maggie Gyllenhaal and Keri Mulligan, it's, go.
Oh, I was just going to add, I think we have a panel about that too here at the festival.
We do, sorry. I should be better at
Power
promoting.
of Story #2 on Thursday of next week.
Yeah.
I think we have time for just
And there's that.
we have time for just one or two questions. So, this man here in the blue.
It's Didier Alouche from Canal Plus France. Mr. Redford, here's a question for you. One of the most expected documentary of the selection this year is the one about Jane Fonda in 5 acts, if I'm correct. You guys made, I think, 5 movies together, something like that. And you were kind of icons of a certain American cinema, a more free, a more auteur, a more involved cinema that you did in the 70s and the 80s. What do you think is the influence of this cinema in American cinema today?
Well, what's that got to do with Jane Fonda?
Because you are both kind of
connect
icons
the
of
two.
this kind of thing.
Well, do you want to talk about Jane first or the other two?
Whatever you want.
What's the influence of the cinema of the films you did with Jane on the cinema of today? That kind
Oh,
of 70s cinema.
I don't know. In other words, I have no idea. All I know is that I will just talk about Jane for a moment, because she and I covered about 47 to 50 years of filmmaking. And we covered times that were changing. And I can only say that in terms of Jane, she's always somebody I've worked with, and she's always been very easy to work with. In other words, just the way it was, that she and I seem to be speaking the same language in film. We didn't need to discuss, we didn't need to analyze. We just step up and just let it happen. And it fell into place quite easily to the point where she just became somebody very easy to work with. We had our independent lives to lead, but when it came to filmmaking, we came together and there wasn't a lot of dialogue. And I remember when we were going to make The Electric Horseman, Sidney Pollack and I wanted to make The Electric Horseman. It was a 50-page script with nothing beyond that. And we decided, let's just go for it. Let's just start filming and see where it takes us. We might go into improvisation. And the actress that we had at that time was very nervous about that, very nervous. And we were going back and forth with her and her agent. And suddenly Jane heard about this. She said, I'll do it. And she just jumped in and she did it. And that was the film. So that's why I had a very comfortable relationship with Jane. In terms of anything beyond that, that's her business that I'm not connected with.
We have unfortunately run out of time. I would just like to thank our special panelists today and thank you all for the great questions.
And thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara.